Okay, let's just jump right in. The world of venture capital, it's not what it used to be. For a long time, we kind of thought it was a single global playing field where the best ideas would win, right? Well, that world has fractured. It's completely split in two. We're now living with two very different and frankly competing ecosystems, one based in the US and the other in China. And if you're a founder, this isn't just some trend to watch. It's a massive structural shift that changes literally everything.
And look, that is no exaggeration. The single playbook that everyone used, the one that told you how to raise money, how to structure your company, how to scale up, it's gone, torn up. What we have now is a totally new landscape, one that's divided by clashing philosophies, tangled up in different legal systems, and walled off by geopolitics. For any founder with big ambitions, learning to navigate this new world is probably the most critical skill you can have right now.
At the very heart of this split are two completely different ways of thinking about innovation. So think of it this way. The US model is like the adventurer. It's all about private capital, chasing those huge, moonshot, 0-to-1 breakthroughs that create entirely new industries out of thin air. But then you have the Chinese model, the architect. This is driven more by a national strategy, and it's focused on taking proven technologies and just scaling them like crazy, from 1 to 100, weaving them into this gigantic industrial machine.
All right, so let's get into it. In this first section, let's really break down what this great divergence actually looks like on the ground. We're talking about a fundamental clash of money, of technology, and of national ambition that is completely reshaping the startup world as we know it.
You know, it really all starts with the money. Where does it come from and what does it want? In the US, venture capital is all about market capitalism. It's about finding that next unicorn and getting massive returns. But in China, it's increasingly becoming a tool of the state, part of a huge industrial strategy designed to build up national champions in really key sectors.
And this slide, wow, this really tells the story in terms of hardware. The US controls almost 3/4 of the world's high-end AI compute power, a whopping 74%. This is what fuels that classic Silicon Valley belief in scaling laws, this idea that you can get to the next breakthrough just by throwing more data and more chips at a problem. It's a brute force approach, you know? And it's powered by just immense amounts of private capital.
So if you're China and you're facing restrictions on getting those high-end chips, you can't really compete on brute force. So what do? Well, you change the game. You pivot to efficiency. We're seeing models like DeepSeek that are achieving performance that's almost as good as their US rivals, but get this, they're using a tiny fraction of the computing power. This isn't just some clever workaround. It's a deep philosophical shift away from chasing the absolute frontier to mastering practical industrial-scale applications.
So let's just lay it all out, side by side. The US is laser-focused on software, on frontier AI, funded by private money looking for that next massive disruption. Meanwhile, China, backed by these enormous government-guided funds, is going all in on hard tech. We're talking semiconductors, robotics, advanced manufacturing. They're prioritizing scale and constant iteration to beef up their industrial power. It's just two completely different ball games.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture, but this is where it gets personal. And honestly, pretty scary for founders. Because these macro differences, they create very real risks right there at the deal table. In this next part, we're going to see how this clash of philosophies turns into a clash of contracts.
Seriously, I want you to stop and just think about this question for a second. Because buried deep in the legal jargon of a term sheet, there could be a clause that puts not just your company on the line, but your house, your savings, your entire personal financial future. And this is hands down one of the biggest dangers in this new divided VC world.
So, here it is, the absolute killer detail, redemption rights. In a US deal, if your startup doesn't hit its targets or can't find an exit, the company is liable. The risk is contained within the business. But in many Chinese VC deals, it's a whole different story. The founder has to personally guarantee to buy back the investor's shares. So if the company fails, they can come after you personally. We're talking your house, your savings, everything. It's a shocking shift from corporate risk to deeply personal risk.
And believe me, the risks don't stop there. Chinese term sheets often give investors sweeping veto rights over pretty much every major decision, which can really strip founders of their control. Double-dip participation is common, which means investors get their initial investment back plus their percentage of whatever's left over. And to top it off, founders often get locked into these long-term service agreements with huge financial penalties if they ever try to leave.
And just when you thought it couldn't get more complicated,
The governments have jumped in, building this incredible maze of regulations that can block deals, freeze up capital, and basically dictate where technology can and cannot go.
So coming into the US, you've got CFIUS. And this isn't some dusty old government committee anymore. No way. It is an aggressive, proactive body that is actively hunting for deals to review. And you know, a few years ago, they might have negotiated to manage the risks. Now, especially with Chinese money and sensitive tech, the default answer is looking more and more like an outright no.
And these walls, they go both ways. The new reverse CFIUS, as people are calling it, now blocks American capital from flowing out to China's most strategic tech sectors. This directly prevents U.S. venture funds from investing in the exact hard tech areas that Beijing sees as critical. It's basically the U.S. government putting up a giant stop sign for American money.
But here's the thing about capital. It's like water. It always finds a new path. And as that traditional US-China connection starts to freeze over, we're seeing these new safe harbors and brand new sources of funding pop up to fill the void.
For years, everyone used the Cayman Islands as their go-to neutral offshore home. But today, just being neutral isn't enough. You have to be seen as legitimate, as trusted. And that's exactly why Singapore's variable capital company, the VCC, has become the new gold standard. It's got this rock-solid reputation for compliance, a huge network of tax treaties, and it lets companies build real, actual operations there, which is a huge deal for earning the trust of Western investors.
So who's funding all these new structures? Well, more and more, it's the sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East. You got to think of them as the new super LPs. They're the big money that invests in the VC funds themselves. But here's the key difference. Unlike the old guard, they aren't just chasing the highest possible financial return. They're playing a different game, a much longer game. They have a strategic mission to completely transform their own economies.
And that means if you're pitching to them, your old deck just won't cut it. It's not just about your market size anymore. It's about how your technology fits into their national goals, like Saudi Vision 2030. They're going to want to know, are you willing to set up a real presence there? Will you help train local talent? How do you contribute to their big, long-term vision for the future? Okay, so with all these different pieces flying around, what on earth is a founder supposed to do? How do you possibly build a global company in a world that's so fractured? Well, in our final section, we're going to lay out the new playbook that's starting to emerge from all this.
Okay, so here's the play the smartest founders are running right now. It's called a dual-track architecture. Here's how it works. Step 1, you set up a holding company in a neutral, highly respected place like Singapore. This is where you raise your global capital from the US, Europe, the Middle East. Step 2, you have a totally separate operating company back in China to tap into that incredible supply chain and local funding. And step 3, this is the most important part. Your core intellectual property, your secret sauce, lives safely in that neutral holding company, protected by a geopolitical firewall.
And here's the thing, you can't tell the same story to everyone anymore. Your business plan has to speak multiple languages. When you're talking to VCs in Silicon Valley, you hammer on your disruptive tech, your global scale. When you're in China, you talk about how you fit into the supply chain, how you support national policy. And when you're pitching funds in the Middle East, the whole story is about technology transfer and aligning with their national vision. It's one company, but 3 very different narratives.
At the end of the day, the era of a single, flat world for startups, it's over. What we have now are 2 very different models of innovation. The American adventurer and the Chinese architect. For founders, this isn't really a problem to solve. It's a new reality to master. The challenge, and of course the opportunity, is to build a company structure and a story that can actually bridge this great divide. The question for you is no longer just what you will build, but how and where you will build it.